So thanks for all the persons present in the room, for all the persons that are also connected with us online for this discussion and debate on climate change is not an equalizer. So we have, I'm Ludovic Voet from the ETUC, Confederal Secretary in charge of climate change, climate policies, energy policy. At the ETUC. We have in the debate for today, we will have a contribution from Bella Galgoci, senior researcher at the ETUI, and then we have guests with us and experts who will contribute. So we have Kate Rayworth from Donut Economics Action Lab. We have Éloi Laurent with us from the OFCE, Lebogang Moulaisi from COSATU, and Philippe Lambert with us in the room, co-president of the group of the Greens in the European Parliament. I will be really brief in my introduction, but I wanted to show a little graphic that I think is also that can introduce the discussion of today, at least as a contribution from my side. And I'm waiting that it's shown. I hope you can see it, but I think it's two graphics that shows a little bit the issues of inequalities with the effects of climate change. So on the left, you see in the EU, the division of emissions by percentage of the population. So you see that on the extreme left, maybe not, they are not extreme left as voters, but the top 1% of EU in terms of revenues, so the richest 1%, have more or less 55 tons of CO2 emission per year. And you can see the distribution between the source of emission. And then we see that for the 10%, the richest, we are a little bit above 20 ton. And then when you see the middle and low income household, of course, the emissions are lower, and for the poorest in our society. So in the EU, that's not world figures, it's EU figures. The emissions are quite low. So I think it shows also that where the emissions come from, but also maybe that the answer is not, it will not cost so much to those who are, that it's possible to do it, and that it will not cost so much to the middle and low income household to go in this transition, because there's always a fear from a low income household that the transition will left them behind. Of course, it's possible, because there's the issue of will they have work in will the transition be fair and just, and will they find work and have decent income in the future? But we see that from the source of emission, they are not the top contributors. And on the right, you also see the evolution in time. So between 1990 and 2015 of the emissions, and we can see that the richest 1% increased their emissions in this period between 1990 and 2015, while for the other parts of the population, there's a reduction. So we see that already now, sorry, we see that here we can also see one of the problem is that emissions are decreasing for the low and middle income household, while the richest part in the population are increasing their emissions. So yes, that was my brief introduction. I will directly go to Bella for input from the research for 8 minutes, and then the different speakers will have 10 to 12 minutes to give their views and contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ludo, and good morning, everybody. So I will pick up on this point that you started, adding one thing that since 1990, mankind was emitting exactly the same amount of CO2s that between the start of the Industrial Revolution until 1990. So after we already started to talk about climate change and Rio Earth Summit 92, once more we put the same into the air, and half of that was actually the richest. So it's a huge responsibility out there. But I would like to say now, not going through anything, and we were having two panels already where we discussed climate-related inequalities. I have to say that, well, the title was the climate change is not an equalizer. Well, that's not a question. I also would say that even climate policy is not an equalizer, and that is probably more of an issue to think about. But before we come to that, it's just flag up that in the context of climate, environment, and social, we are facing inequalities on a different magnitude that anything we saw before. And the problem and the constellation of this inequality is genuinely or really different. Yeah. So the ultimate horror inequality scenario is a Noah Ark's case. Yeah, when the planet is inhabitable or the most parts of the planet are uninhabitable, and then only the selected few can make it. Yeah, that is kind of the ultimate inequality. But in order to prevent this scenario, we have to do a lot and to change everything we do. And as Ludo already said, the different dimensions of this inequality, it's not legible probably, but illustrative of the complexity of climate inequalities, because we have, first of all, the climate change aspect, so the effects of climate change. So for different countries, for different income groups, different parts of the population, we have the responsibility, exactly the carbon emissions, the footprints. We have adaptation capacity. How can people react to already deteriorating environmental and climate circumstances? And then we have double and triple inequality, because double in the sense that those who are most responsible are also the less affected, and they are also more able to adapt. Yeah, so it's actually everything just in the reverse. We have, of course, a wide range of between country differences and a huge and serious global global south problem, historical emissions, loss and damage issues, adaptation capacities again, and anyway capacity for low-income countries to manage this well, necessary decarbonization process. And I have to say, so well, of course, and then we have mitigation, climate mitigation, climate change mitigation. That is, of course, the policies that are needed to control a future catastrophe. And these policies, at least now, are really very concrete. And in the European Green Deal and the Fit for 55, at least in Europe now, it is really concrete. We know what is coming, and it also hurts. That is also clear. It has an effect on jobs, on employment in general, job transitions, and it has distributional effects, because if you have the energy price, the carbon price, and there are other aspects of these distributional issues. This is why I think it's really kind of a complex issue, because I have to mention also the affordability of low carbon technologies. We have huge inequality in that, because it is very clear that we can master this energy crisis, but also the transport crisis not only, but also with new low carbon technology solutions. And these are important. It is not only that we can, and the accessibility of these, affordability, is very uneven. So it is the rich who are getting access, electric cars, Teslas, you even get a bonus to buy a Tesla, or anything else. Other people cannot afford that. It is again, it's kind of a new dimension, but it needs to be tackled. So it is what is important here, that we need a comprehensive policy package to handle this multidimensional and interlinked the set of inequalities, and this is a huge challenge. So even I just give one example to illustrate that even the best kind of most democratic and well-functioning governance system is hugely challenged to respond, because transport poverty, it is quite important, and we know it very well, and especially since the Fit for 55 package with the ETS upcoming probably, ETS 2, we have an issue with transport poverty even before the energy crisis came, but now it came as well. If you look at there, who is affected by higher fuel price? It is not like when in energy poverty, where it is clearly the lowest income decile most affected. For transport or individual transport fuel poverty, it is the fourth and the fifth income decile. So it's kind of the middle income people, because the lowest income people simply don't have cars, because they cannot even afford an old diesel. But those that can afford the old diesel, they have the real problem, and not those who have the Teslas. And then you have the rural population, the urban population, and the suburban population. So the rich greenbelt, the more poor rural area with not enough public transport infrastructure, and then you have urban areas, and they are all different. So if you want to have a fuel rabatt, in Germany has a fuel rabatt, everybody gets a 20% discount, In Hungary, you actually have half price for fuel, diesel, and everybody, this is not the way to do it. Anyway, so I just wanted to show that it is extremely complex. And we shouldn't forget about the global south. We also had a workshop to discuss all these issues. One thing is very clear, that Europe here, we are, and that is always a problem for me, very much self-focused on Europe. We don't realize that of course it is important how the job transitions are in the automobile industry in Europe, and how the steelworker is going to have a future, very important. But from the European perspective, this is everything when you talk about just transition. But just transition actually first means that Europe has to take its responsibility in the global thing to make sure that all the histories are well. The other thing is that for the global climate change to get under control, it is much more important that the rest of the world is managing the decarbonization. India, Indonesia, Brazil. Not just because we are nice, but these are the big countries, and these are the countries that still need to develop, because in the global north, we are talking about beyond growth, even managed degrowth. Yes, sure, we can do that, but not Indonesia. So they still have to grow, and they also still have to develop. And for that, they need to have, well, a pathway that is not emitting more. And that's why Europe and the rich world is not living up to its commitment for climate finance. Not even this 100 billion per year, which is anyway, it's ridiculous in itself, but even that. Not providing adaptation assistance. The Netherlands is happy to sell high low carbon technology. They are very good in flood defense. So Indonesia is thinking, so, well, who should help Indonesia than the Netherlands? But selling their stuff. So I mean, these are the big issues. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Bella. And so one of the points you said, and I would like to ask, of course, all the panel to also answer to this, because yeah, the title is Climate Change is not an equalizer, but as you said, climate policies are not per se equalizers neither. So if they are not just, climate policies can be done in a way that leads to price increase, that leads to destruction of jobs. So they are not per se equalizers. So can we have climate policies that put in that are equalizers and that put the problem of inequalities at the center? I think this is a little bit the goal of today, of the discussion of today. And there's often the economic myth of the trickle down, that the richest, that because people have high income, it will trickle to the poorest in society. But with climate change, it's even more dramatic, this theory, because it's not trickle down that we have, but it's floodings. So yeah, the direct consequence of massive concentration of income is the consequence that the poorest are experiencing via global warming. So I go directly to Éloi Laurent. You have the floor online. I hope everything will work. Thanks.
Yeah, I hope to. Thank you very much, Ludovic, and thank you very much for the segue, because my presentation is exactly about how to build just transition policies in Europe. So please just let me know if you see the slides and if you...
We do.
Okay, and do you see them moving? Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So very happy to be here, and I would like to thank E2I for just doing this great work on what I think is a key framework, which is how to build a convergence between ecological policies and social policies. And E2I is clearly a front runner in this area. And so thank you very much for organizing this and for all the work that you are doing on this. So my presentation is going to focus on solutions rather than the problem, which is that climate change is not an equalizer. So what I will do is first, I will start with in a very French way, which is that, of course, what happens in France is critical to the rest of the world. So being very French here, and I will start with the yellow vest crisis and maybe arguing that the whole world watched Paris burn, and I think concluded two things that are, I think, misperceptions about the question of socially just ecological policies. And then I will argue first that what's really problematic is not the inequality of transition, but the inequality of non-transition, which is very much where we are today. And I think the current inflation is a great illustration of this point. And then I will talk about more positively about how to build just transition policies along two paths. So first, the yellow vest misunderstandings. Okay, so in French we say contresens. So I think the yellow vest is haunting Europe in the sense that everyone concluded that, well, Paris showed that you cannot build ecological transition because people are going to revolt against that. And so the perception was that the energy climate transition is actually creating inequality that triggers social revolts. And that was the clear conclusion from a number of people after the yellow vest crisis. The reality is that the energy climate transition has barely started, all right? So social inequality and social revolt stems from the current economic system and from non-transition policies rather than transition policy. It would be great to have transition policies, but I mean, in France, the energy, climate, and energy transition has not started at all. All right, France is the last country in the EU when it comes to the deployment of renewable energy. All right, and the one country that does not respect its commitments. So it's very clear that the problem is with non-transition policies and not transition policies. And the yellow vest revolted against non-transition policies, the fact that they are trapped by fossil fuels, not the fact that transition policies are creating problems in terms of income and employment. And I think that the current rise of inflation, what we call inflation, is very much an illustration of that, because what we call inflation is really the collision between the dependency on fossil fuels and fuel poverty. This is what inflation is about, at least in Europe, okay? And this is fossil poverty. You could calculate an index for every EU country of fossil poverty, multiplying dependency on fossil fuels by fuel poverty, right? So you cannot, the Romans used to say that you cannot argue about your own turpitudes, right? You cannot argue about your own flows. So what we are hearing is that the current economic system is complaining about its own features, right? So let's start. Let's try with transition policies. We'll see if they are creating social inequality. But the social inequality of today, and especially the question of inflation today, which is so urgent, has everything to do with the current economic system, not with transition policies. The second perception, it's close to the first one, a bit different, is that, well, it is impossible to avoid a social ecological trade-off, all right? The end of the month pitted against the end of the world. Well, first of all, the problem of poverty doesn't start at the end of the month. It starts at the beginning of the month, right? And then the problem is not the end of the world. It's the end of the hospitality of planet Earth for the most deprived humans, right? So I think that this saying end of the month and end of the world is problematic. But most importantly, I think that building just transition policy is actually both feasible and economical, right? So it's not true to say that there is an unescapable social ecological trade-off. You can actually overcome this trade-off. So in a recent paper that was just published a few weeks ago, I tried to map this constellation of environmental inequalities that Bella was talking about, and try to have a typology of different types of environmental inequalities, so type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, with different types of justice, a different type of vectors. The paper is about air pollution, but of course it very much applies to the climate crisis. And a key feature of today and of this inequality of non-transition is really the fact that you have, on the one hand, exposure and sensitivity inequality, which leads to vulnerability. Once again, this is what we see with fossil fuels today. And on the other hand, the question of responsibility, of course. And in a way, what we need to work on at this level, which is the inequality of non-transition, is to try to work on social attribution, the way that, climate change science works on physical attribution. And social attribution is trying to connect responsibility inequality with vulnerability inequality. I think we have some great work on vulnerability inequality and responsibility inequality on the other hand, but not so much on the connection between the two. And I think that would be a good starting point. Once again, these inequalities are about non-transition. They are not about transition, all right? So let's be clear about that. So what about building just transition policy in a more, let's say, positive way? So there are two paths, I think, that are clear. The first path is that we need to show that the necessary reduction of social inequalities can alleviate ecological crisis. And of course, that's the problem of those hyper carbon footprints, which, as the graph shown by Ludovic clearly indicated, is First of all, about, air travel, luxury vacation, SUVs. I mean, why do you need an SUV in Paris, which is the second city in the world with the largest transit system? You need to ban SUVs from Paris, period. I don't see any kind of justification now that we know, you don't need a 1,500 kilos vehicle to drive a 85 kilo man, for 10 minutes. It doesn't make any sense. So let's start with those luxury emissions, and then we'll come to the survival emissions of the yellow vest. But if you start with the survival emissions of the yellow vest, of course you're going to have social unrest. I mean, it's just logical. So the first thing, you need to show that this necessary reduction of social inequalities can alleviate ecological crisis. And this is where we need to start to begin with, right? And then conversely, that ecological transition policies can reduce social inequalities and actually improve the well-being of the poorest. And for that, you need to connect, the taxation of luxuries to the provision of necessities. And you can do that. We've shown with a colleague that you can actually have a tax system in France on carbon where you redistribute money to the yellow vest rather than, penalizing their survival emissions. You can do that. You can tax, luxury air travel and give money to people to have, sufficiency equipment. So Martin Luther King Jr. said that capitalism is a system that takes necessity from the masses to give luxuries to the classes. Well, just transition policies should do exactly the opposite. This is exactly what just transition are about, taking luxuries from the higher classes to give necessities to the masses. It's very clear, and you can do that. It's called the tax system, and we are quite good at it in Europe. But it also needs, of course, a restructuring of consumption around the question of sufficiency. And for that, we need to really think hard about social innovation and social cooperation, which is the actual breakthrough technology of the 21st century. We don't need this giant vacuum cleaner that is going to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. We have the breakthrough technology, and we have mastered this technology for millennia. It's called social cooperation. And we need to work on how social cooperation can connect to sufficiency. And I mean, there's a lot of good work around this, right? And the second path is even more ambitious in the sense that it is about designing social ecological policies from the onstart, right? Which now and in the long run can reduce both social inequalities and environmental degradation. And if you want to have a sense of do they exist and what they are about, you can read the third report from the IPCC, chapter 5, especially, and you have plenty of those policies that actually exist. But it also needs to go with a redefinition of wealth. And one, I think, or at least my belief, is that the key indicator for the 21st century that can go beyond GDP is what I call full health, and that health should be put at the center. Why? Because health connects us very clearly with the rest of nature. And that health is also, I think, the great indicator that comes out of the COVID crisis, where you see that we need this full health in the sense of mental health being connected to biological health, individual health being connected to collective health, and human health being connected to ecological health, right? And this is my segue for Kate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eloi. So let's go then to Kate. How do you maybe also comment on what Eloi is saying, and how maybe your idea of donuts economy take into account this dimension? Thank you.
Thank you. A real pleasure to be here and to follow these fascinating contributions. It's a very nice segue. So yep, I'll start with the donut, and I want to start by saying, of course, at the focus of the donut here we have climate change, but I want to consider climate change as one of the critical life support systems, and recognize that as we deal with the climate crisis, we must also deal with the ecological crisis. And so I'm going to think about a just transition in response to both climate and ecological crises, because I think it's inevitable that we must deal with these together and at the same time. So in terms of creating a circular economy at the same time as reducing our emissions, for example. And I also want to acknowledge, to Bella's point, the vast majority of people who are here in the center of the donut falling short on the essentials of life. Of course, The vast majority are in the global south. There is deprivation in the midst of the global north, yes, but the vast majority in the global south, and the vast majority of these historic impacts on the living world are from the global north. So I think there's a very important question and debate around the relationship between reparations and responsibility, historic and future, from the global north to the global south. And that question has to become more alive. I'm going to focus my comments on the scale of the city, which is where I've mostly been working through the work we're doing at Donut Economics Action Lab. And just building on what others have said, I think we are seeing, obviously, in an era where we need to make radical change of direction, we must move from a neoliberal era that we inherited, which accepted market outcomes, towards moving towards state-determined and community-determined policies that actually drive for particular sufficiency, moving, in the words of George Monbiot, from private luxury and public squalor, which is what that brilliant graph that Ludovic showed at the beginning, of private luxury of air travel and excessive travel and public squalor for the majority. We need to move to a situation of private sufficiency and public luxury. And we will only get there through collective provisioning, through the state, through the public, and through the commons. So I want to speak to the importance in the design of places, in the design of any place. A city needs to think, what is our purpose? Who do we want to be as a city? How do we relate to our citizens, to the industries here, to all of our civic organizations? How are we governed? But crucially, how are the sources of wealth creation in this place owned? Because that will profoundly shape how they're financed and what that finance is in service of. So I want to speak to the question of ownership. And I think we're moving to an era where we will realize the importance of public and civic ownership of critical sources of wealth creation if we are going to make the kind of policy interventions that these times demand. One way of thinking of it is the power to edit out options that no longer belong. And while we're speaking to these, we need to edit out of cities the SUV. We need to edit out private jet travel, for example. We need to edit down, I think, huge inequalities of resource use. And I think we will see a return to rationing. It may be given a different name, but we will see an increasing use of rationing in carbon, in our water use, in a response to climate adaptation as well as mitigation. And we need to edit in, so enter into the landscape, critical provisioning like public transport. Need to, of course, get those in the right order, as Eloi was speaking about. Don't edit out options for the poorest, edit in options for all. So I just want to bring 3 examples, and I've got them in front of me. So one, here's my little house. Thinking about the future of housing, every city I'm speaking with is saying, we know we need to retrofit our housing stock and we need to build new housing. How do we do this in a way that does not drive climate change? So there is, of course, a rise in low carbon housing developments. And how do we ensure that those are both low carbon, low material use, and affordable? And again, this is critical for policy that says we are going to edit in social housing. We're going to bring it back. I can think of cities, London, where I grew up, that has a huge housing crisis because Thatcher sold off a lot of the social housing, and now it's they don't have that option to control the future of the housing stock in the same way. Whereas the city of Vienna, over 60% of people live in social housing or cooperatively owned housing because that was a city choice. I've just recently come back from Barcelona, where they are redeveloping old industrial districts of industries that have closed, taking the city blocks and very clearly determining that a significant proportion of that must be redeveloped as affordable housing. So retrofitting in the city, 30% of retrofit must be affordable housing. New build, 40 to 50% must be affordable housing. The city is buying back housing to increase its stock of social housing. So taking a very proactive ability to edit in socially affordable housing in that city. A second example, I bring the future of water. Again, in London, water is privatized. In Barcelona, water is run by a private company. We know the city of Paris privatized water some decades ago, and then more recently brought it back under public control, which both gives you access to providing it publicly, public luxury. There are water fountains that everybody can use. You don't need to buy bottled water, but also controlling the relationship of the city's water with farmers in the same river basin. And it's critical to have that control over water, which we know will be rationed in the future. The city of Durban in South Africa has introduced a water rationing policy through tiered pricing. The first 750 litres per household are free, and then the pricing kicks in. And again, using the control, the ownership of the water supply means that these kinds of policies can be introduced that drive sufficiency and far greater quality. The last example I'll use is a pair of textile scissors and cloth, right? The circular economy is bringing textile circularity back to cities and places in Europe. The city of Amsterdam aims to be a textile valley, not Silicon Valley, but textile valley, with the denim sector as a really important sector there already. In the UK, there is an ambition to bring circularity in fashion back to some deindustrialized cities, such as, well, from London, but to Manchester, Leeds, and Glasgow. So how can the return of some industrial sectors through manufacturing, through the rise and design of a circular economy, how can that increase and lean into equity? How can the jobs that are created there actually offer retraining and new opportunities to people who have lost jobs? How can we ensure that the control over the circular economy is not controlled in few hands so that it becomes a form of elite circularity controlled by a few corporations, but that it actually creates an ecosystem of small and medium enterprises? And how are those owned? How can local authorities, cities, and nations lean into this opportunity of bringing new kinds of manufacturing back and make sure it's employee owned or cooperatively owned or community ownership? So I think there are really important opportunities as new sectors return, such as through circularity, to design them well, to design them for far more equitable employment, reskilling, and ensure that they don't repeat the patterns of the past. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. We go, I think it's a video. Yes. So the contribution of Lebogang from COSATU, so the South African Trade Union. So yes, let's go.
And I'm the head of policy for COSATU. I'm in charge of all the labor market and climate justice response and just transition work for the Congress of South Africa.
Do we try again or?
Yes.
Do we try again or after? Okay.
Good day, everyone. My name is Lebogang Mulaisi, and I'm the head of policy for COSATU. I'm in charge of all the labor market and climate justice response and just transition work for the Congress of South African Trade Unions. Let me begin by expressing great appreciation for the invitation to attend this conference. Unfortunately, we were not able to attend in person or virtually because of a number of commitments, but we are appreciative of the fact that we can actually make this video and give some of the insights from the Congress of South Africa's Trade Union, especially part of the South African initiatives that we've been working on when it comes to climate change, climate justice, as well as the just transition. So one of the things that we were asked to speak about is, what is it looking like here in South Africa in terms of impacts of climate change? I think South Africa is not immune to what is going on in the rest of the world. I think for those who thought that climate change would catch up with you in the next 50 or 60 years, now we know that that's not true. We are starting to see the impacts of a changing climate on our society and our economies, and the destruction that it sometimes leaves behind. Here in South Africa, in the southern coastal regions, which are the regions that are vital for our import and export activities, is starting to grapple with some of these intense changes to the climate. We're recently recovering from huge devastation as a result of excess flooding in the southern coastal region. 7 years prior to that, the infamous day zero that was taking place in the western coastal regions showed us just how catastrophic a drought can be, and why it is important for us to build climate resilient cities and to increase our mitigation and adaptation in order to deal with these changes in our climate. So we've not been immune from these impacts, and we realize now, well, we've always had a realization, but I think it's more exacerbated now, that we need to change the way in which industries conduct their activities in a way that does not exploit the environment and does not leave us in the position where we are in, where we are more prone now to severe weather activity, whether it be through floods as well as droughts. I think from as early as 2009, COSATU as a trade union federation historically took a resolution that recognizes the dangers of climate change as both an ecological but also an economic crisis that will affect mostly the working class and the poor. Unfortunately, the rich as well as the middle class can easily migrate away from the changing weather patterns. That is not easy for the working class and the poor, and I think that is why, as early as 2009, COSATU came to the realization that we need to take these issues seriously, because at the heart of it, this is a working class issue to begin with. So, if from that point on, the Trade Union Federation adopted a position that in order to deal with the climate devastation, there needs to be a process to transition to a low carbon economy, and the only way that we can transition to a low carbon economy is if we do this in a manner that is just. Now, transitions and the politics of transitions in South Africa have been quite contested for quite some time. It's been a contested terrain here in South Africa. And that's because of the vested right issues and some of the appropriation around transitioning and the language around transition, even though we know that this is a trade union concept. And most trade unions, particularly in the global north, adopted this approach because it was in an effort to protect workers from the effects of a transition. Because if we don't adopt a process of a just transition, it is the worker and the poor that will be left through the cracks, to fall through the cracks. So it was then adopted here in South Africa particularly, and given a bit of a revolutionary connotation to the term of a just transition. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a minute. So the coal value chain here in South Africa has been critical and important for our society for quite some time. Through coal, we've been able to generate very cheap electricity and energy over the years. But we cannot ignore what it has meant in terms of negative externalities for communities as well as workers. And if we were to factor in the cost of the negative externality, it would actually mean that coal as a resource is not really as cheap as what we thought it was, because all we're looking at is the rands and cents cost of it, but not necessarily taking into consideration the negative externalities that come with the excessive use of coal. South Africa is very heavily reliant on fossil fuels, particularly coal. When you look at the electricity generation, almost 90% of our electricity comes from coal. And as a result of our coal activities, we are the highest emitter in Africa. I think from as early as 2011, the Congress of South Africa's trade unions realized that this was not going to be sustainable in the long run, whether we're looking at health impacts of this, whether we're looking at just generally livelihood impacts of our excessive use of coal, it wouldn't be sustainable in the long run. Therefore, there was a need to transition and to ensure that there is a just transition to a low carbon economy. Because even in the studies that COSATU has endorsed over the years, we do realize the potential for opportunities in the transition to a low carbon economy. Recently, the unions here in South Africa, particularly notably COSATU, through the Job Summit process, requested the establishment of the Presidential Climate Commission. And what this commission would do was to look at the framing, firstly, of a just transition for South Africa, but secondly, to identify the opportunities that exist in the just transition in order to ensure that indeed we do not leave communities and the workforce behind, so that if there are opportunities that do emanate in the low carbon economy, they do benefit communities that do rely on currently fossil fuel intensive activities and workers that equally rely on fossil fuel intensive activities. I think I must give this disclaimer, and I make this disclaimer a lot. We do recognize that, you know, the transition in itself is disruptive in nature and does poses a potential for a displacement. But through our efforts as trade unions here in South Africa, we have put together frameworks, we have put together policy documents, and we are encouraging workers to, through the process of collective bargaining, to collectively bargain for a just transition to ensure that indeed workers are not left behind. One mechanism that we have adopted is through the jobs guarantee process, that indeed workers are not left behind, because employers in collective bargaining can begin to guarantee workers' jobs, workers who are then meant to transition to other activities that are more less fossil fuel intensive in nature. In a nutshell, this is probably the evolution of some of the work that has happened here in South Africa, and just the participation of trade unions. We've been very active in social dialogue, whether it's at the level of the presidency through the Climate Commission, or whether it's at the level of our National Social Dialogue Platform, NEDLAC. We do participate on these issues to indeed make sure that workers are not left behind, and we minimize the economic impacts and the environmental impacts on the workforce as well as on communities. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for this invitation. Good day, everyone. My name is
Third time. Thanks, perfect. So we go now to Philippe, maybe as it's also an important week in the European Parliament because there was the vote on the Fit for 55 package. I guess one of the questions can be, Kate spoke about public ownership, Eloi spoke about ecological progressive taxation, Lebogang spoke about just transition. Are these elements present in the Fit for 55 package that in our views are really also dependent really on market mechanism and price signal? So is the dimension of fight against inequalities or integrated at the core of the Fit for 55 package, or will we need to complement this with social and labor provisions to make sure that there's a just transition?
Is this a real question? Well, good morning, everyone. A pleasure to be here. Really, I'll have a meeting at 11, so I will need to leave in time to be in the parliament by then. But first, I liked very much what Eloi said. Inequality is not the product of the transition. Inequality is a product of the system we are living in. That's fact. That's just fact. And it is actually made worse by the fact that we start hitting the planetary boundaries or overstepping the planetary boundaries, because it inflicts pain disproportionately on the worst off people in society. But this is exactly the product of a system which is totally tailored not to the needs of the many, but to the greed of the few. That's fact. Look at our taxation systems, look at the labor market organization, look at the financial regulation or lack thereof. The idea, and I think you were the one citing this really bullshit expression of trickle-down economy, which is of course a lie. It's a lie that has been maintained, entertained by mainstream economists, still being taught, by the way, as we speak, still being taught in all business schools, in all economics schools, that indeed make the rich richer, everyone benefit. And the whole system is built upon that. So no surprise that it produces inequality. I mean, it is made for it. It is made for it. So indeed, it's true that a poorly designed transition geared towards respecting the planetary boundaries can actually make inequality worse. Because basically, if you look at humanity's ecological footprint, well, it is of course the product of individual ecological footprints times the number of individuals. I mean, the average footprint times the number of individuals. So you might say there's at least two ways to reduce this. You can reduce it by reducing the average footprint, or you can reduce it by reducing the number of individuals. You might say, what are you talking about? Mass extermination of people? Well, actually, no one would use that kind of language, but I can tell you I witnessed discussions where basically, and that was already almost 10 years ago, you had the boss of Rio Tinto back then, Tom Albanese, a guy who was convicted for corruption after that. But the guy basically was saying, well, planetary boundaries, give me a break. I mean, everyone wants to have the American way of life. No one on earth can deny that aspiration to anyone. And so the only issue is, tell me how much you're prepared to pay and I will dig deeper, which translated into common language means for those who will be able to afford it, there will be solutions and let the others die. Basically, that is what it means. Of course, the guy would never admit it, but that's exactly the consequence. And so indeed, there's one way of doing the transition. Okay, well, let's say that the way of life of the top 2% that you showed at the beginning of your slide are holy, cannot be touched. Well, if they produce half of our ecological footprint, let's eliminate the others so they can continue with this planet. And of course, this is totally unacceptable for the many, and I would say for any normally thinking human being. But indeed, it's true that if basically you use market mechanisms, you will make the constrained expenditures of ordinary people go up, simply because it's also a fact that producing stuff and services in a socially just and ecologically responsible way, well, basically costs more than doing the opposite. If it were the opposite, I mean, if it were cheaper to produce in a just and sustainable way, the entire economy would do that. No, it is better for profits to cut corners with nature, to cut corners with a social justice. In other terms, basic products and services, well, their unit cost is likely to go up. That doesn't mean that they won't be affordable, but they're likely to go up. And so if you add, I mean, basically these rising prices to an already unequal society, you are just compounding the issue. So yes, there's a potential, but I also like very much what Eloi said. That doesn't mean that you cannot organize a transition that actually at the same time reduces the ecological footprint and inequality. And you might again look at this chart at the beginning where the richest basically produce a massive part of our ecological footprint and say, why don't we start there? Because of course, curbing, and there we start talking about rationing or forbidding stuff like SUVs in cities, but that's just a tiny example. Basically saying, well, you cannot fly on your own on a business plane, sorry. Yeah, but you are going to kill the business of making a business aviation. Yeah, so what if we can't afford it as humanity? So it's possible to do it, but doing that means going to the root of the system. Because basically, if you just think, okay, let's keep the DNA of the economic system like we have it, untouched, and just correct at the edges what it does, actually, we are not going to fix the problem. So if you want to reduce footprint while reducing inequality, then you need to change the DNA of our economic system. And indeed, Kate clearly indicated it's about sufficiency. It's about changing also the way we decide about these things, the way we own these things. So this is all possible, and that gives me hope, of course. So if we know that we have a problem in terms of inequality and in terms of planetary boundaries, if we know that there are solutions, the issue is not knowledge. There must be something else that blocks action. And that leads me to the third point in my presentation. Where are we at European level? So, as I said, it's not a matter of knowledge, it's a matter of what? Well, of willingness to act, right? Well, actually, it is to a certain degree, first, a question of willingness to recognize reality. And there, indeed, climate is in the title and of this plenary. And indeed, as Kate said, it's not about climate; it's about the planetary boundaries. But it also shows the state of the debate in Europe. So, if we were still under Jean-Claude Juncker, we would not even speak about climate. I mean, when the guy left his position as a Commission president, he reflected on his 5 years without even mentioning the word climate, while the COP21, the Paris conference, happened under his watch, right? So good news, indeed, we talk about climate, and we have climate neutrality objective 2050, we have minus 55 targeted for 2030, and we have therefore a Fit for 55 package. So you might say, at least we can tick that box. Can we? Can we? So at least if you look at the climate planetary boundary, there is a recognition that we have a problem, but the discussions we have had around the Fit for 55 package already show the limits of that recognition. First, if we were really recognizing the scientific evidence, we would be talking about a Fit for 65 package. We are not talking about that, right? We are talking about a Fit for 55 package. So knowingly, the majorities, the political majorities in Parliament and Council in Europe have decided that they want to undershoot, well, to partially recognize the climate planetary boundary. So it's a recognition, yes, and that is progress compared with denial under Juncker, but it is a partial recognition. And it is even more partial when you look at the measures that we adopted. I mean, phasing out the internal combustion engine in 2035. That is 13 years from now. Phasing out free CO2 allocations in 2032, 10 years from now. That doesn't feel like a climate emergency. Well, if the time scale of emergency is 10 years, then I'm a bit concerned. Because again, when Chirac was saying, and that was in Rio, I think in 1992, so 30 years ago, that our planet is on fire and we look the other way. Well, if it was on fire back then, what is it now? So yes, there's a partial recognition on climate that we have a problem. And so that we need to do something. But as you said, Ludo, we're still talking about market mechanisms. We are not speaking about rationing, of course. We are not speaking basically about a paradigm shift. And before I get there, let's look at the other planetary boundaries. Is there an acknowledgement that we have a problem? Biodiversity. Well, we just had the nature restoration package released the day before yesterday by the Commission with 3 months delay. That also undershoots reality, at least she has released it, but you can already see the massive resistance to do anything. Because we need to feed the world. So let's continue destroying the soil quality. We need to continue destroying biodiversity. We need to continue depending on Russia for fertilizers, chemicals that we need for these fertilizers and pesticides and all the rest of it. So this is complete denial. And I'm not talking about all the rest, pollution. So when we look at the planetary boundaries, we are at the beginning of the recognition that we may have some problem. And the answer to that recognition is below what is needed to fix the problem. Now, as Éloi said, if you want to go on a course that reduces inequality and reduces, well, and leads our societies to live within the planetary boundaries, then indeed you need to go to the DNA of the system. And taxation was mentioned, and indeed taxation is probably the most immediate tool at our disposal because we adopt taxation for next year. I mean, it is not something that you do for 10 years from now. Every year, governments adopt their fiscal laws. They adopt and they adapt them to fund their budgets and their expenditures. And this is something that can be done quickly. And that's one aspect. I would mention another one, which is the way we build social security. And the TUEI knows much more than me about that. How do we fund social security and what does social security do? A third element that is also crucial is the way we organize labor markets. We can organize labor markets to give capital owners the upper hand on the labor market. We can organize labor markets in order for workers to have the upper hand, right? It's a matter of organizing the labor market. It is not a natural thing, the labor market. It is something organized by human beings. And you can organize it to benefit capital owners, and that's what we have. You can organize it in order to benefit workers, and that's what we don't have. So these are already 3 levers that we have. And then Éloi and Kate mentioned other aspects, indeed, regulation. What is permitted, what is not permitted, what can be done, what cannot be done. And that's the idea of rationing behaviors. Well, is it normal that you can fly to Barcelona? Well, now it's a bit more expensive than that, but for $30 or so, no, of course not. So indeed, air travel should be more expensive. But then again, you might say, yeah, but the well-off will always have enough to pay their tickets. So then comes the question, well, should we put a ceiling as to the number of air miles you can fly in your lifetime? Maybe, again, that's this idea of rationing. Are we coming close to that? Did you see any indication that we are starting to touch a system that is based on this idea of making the rich richer, everyone benefits? The answer is no. We are not yet at the beginning of this. I'm a Belgian citizen, so I live in this country. It's been decades that we talk about the need to revisit our taxation system. That is basically, you know, Belgium is a how should I say, a tax hell for workers and a tax haven for capital owners. Maybe we should reverse this. Don't count on it anytime soon. Well, under the current coalition and current circumstances. And it's pretty much like that all over the place. What caused the Gilets jaunes? Actually, what made the Gilets jaunes completely go berserk? And actually, they didn't go berserk. They were quite nice people, most of them. Well, the fact that right before there was a price hike in diesel oil, in diesel fuel, there was this small thing called the abolition of the only wealth tax that France had. So basically, Macron was saying, I'm improving the lot of the 1% and making the lot of the 99% much worse. Surprise? Are you surprised that people are angry? I would be. I would be. And again, the vast majority of them were just shouting their anger. Well, some of them went a bit further, but of course they were finger pointed that they were the bad guys, and the Gilets jaunes were an aberration and a danger to democracy and all the rest of it. So what I mean here is that the paradigm we're in, and it is summarized by, you know, this word of Ursula von der Leyen. She said, okay, the European Green Deal is our new growth strategy. Basically, okay, let's find a new way to power our economy the same under the same model. And that is where I say the consciousness of what causes us to exceed our planetary boundaries is not there. And what it is compounded by another problem is that most of the competencies, the political competencies on, say, at least acting on climate are European. But actually, remember, I mentioned taxation, social security, labor market organization. Well, these are national competencies. And arguably, you might say, whatever little recognition that we have a problem with at least one planetary boundary is, say, more widespread at European level than it is at national level. So actually, you would need a sense of urgency, I would say, on inequality at national level and on climate and planetary boundaries at European level. We have the beginning of a sense of urgency at European level on climate, and small beginning on other planetary boundaries. And we have absolutely no recognition that inequality is an issue at national level. So that explains you why we are really in a danger zone here. And the last thing I'd say is that, well, we can fix that. And indeed, it takes policymakers to change policies. And indeed, the good news about Europe is that basically, as a policymaker, you are not risking your life. That is, no one is holding a gun to your head when you vote or take measures. And also, in order to be re-elected, you do not need, like in the US, between 10 and 15 million every other year to fund your campaign, which forces you to sell yourself to private companies. So yes, as Lenin said, if there's a will, there's a way. That's true, and certainly in Europe. But it won't happen unless you have, within the political decision circles, a shift in the center of gravity. You might say, okay, you want us all to vote green. Yes, of course, I won't be a candidate next time. And I don't believe that the Greens are the only ones who worry about these things. But what I'm saying, when I witness the votes that we have in the European Parliament, frankly, there are still, I remember an exchange, it was a year ago, with Markus Ferber. Markus Ferber is a Bavarian Christian Democrat. And he was attacking us in plenary saying, yeah, it's all nice to act about climate, but if we bequeath the next generations with a destroyed economy and a pile of debt, then they won't have won nothing. Marcus, if we don't fix climate change, there won't be an economy, right? There won't be an economy. So that tells you he doesn't recognize that this is a life and death issue. It is still seen, yeah, okay, this is the preferred topic of the Greens, and they ride on it. And you know, the Social Democrats, it's defending workers. And well, we defend the capital owners. And you know, this is a normal political game. It's not, hey guys, if we don't change this, there will be no future for humanity on this planet. This is still not recognized. This is still not recognized. So, you know, the point I try to make is that we have to recognize, and this is where I get sometimes a bit annoyed or nervous when I hear, you know, the transition should not be punitive. It should leave no one behind. And of course, you hear a lot of that from business federations, interestingly. So don't punish us and don't leave anyone behind. And saying that phrase makes you believe, let's have a win-win-win transition and have everyone on board. Again, your first slide with the top 2%. I mean, these are the ones for which the economic system has been built. They will be the losers. They must be the losers. And if we don't recognize the conflictual aspect of this, we will never act as we need. And again, I'm speaking here in the European Trade Union Institute. Do we think that winning a weekly rest day on Sunday, winning the embryo of social security was done in a nice way? Well, either because capital owners say, okay, I'm in a good mood today, let's do something good for the workers. No, it was conflict. It was conflict because this is about power. And you know, I aspire to a society where power is distributed in an equal way, and we have institutions that really allow us to decide together what we want to do. But this is not where we are today. This is about economic power linked to political power. And we need to upset the balance of power. And if we do not recognize that there's a conflict there, it's about life and death, but some are dying, not will die, are dying sooner than others. And not just in the global south, and Kate is totally right, it's mostly in the global south. But even in this global north, a year ago, hundreds of people in Germany, in Belgium, and it happens to be the people who live in neighborhoods that are vulnerable to floods. Believe me, it's not my social category that lives there, right? So if we don't recognize the conflictual side of it, if we say, okay, let's have everyone happy, no, capital owners won't be happy. And if they are, then we are missing the point. They can't be happy. They can't be happy because we need to stop them from driving this planet to a place where most of humanity will not be able to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. So this leads me to opening a little bit to questions in the 10 minutes that we still have. So if I have questions in the room and maybe also in the chat, I don't know if there's something in the chat. If not, in the room, and I will also have one contribution and question from my side. Yeah. Do we have microphones?
Yeah, Peter, ETUI trainee and EPOC student. So hello to Éloi Laurent, and also hello to Kate from Oxford, Rethinking in the Past. Yeah, great panel, great discussion. Really, really thank you for all of this. I really like the point you just made, Philippe Lambert, on how do we get there? We need to be talking about power and conflict. And for me, I'm really thinking about a labor-nature alliance. We really need to be working towards a really strong commitment from both actors on the side of organized labor and on nature to work together and be really clear in their message and in their action that although there are from time to time trade-offs and conflicts, and that has to be talked about and can't just be brushed aside, there really needs to be a strong labor-nature alliance that attacks the power of capital and really undermines the current growth, like the capitalist growth imperative, which is driving these conflicts and which is also not going to deliver for people and planet. And this real politicization and addressing that front on would be something that I see as really needed. And I just wanted to ask you, how do we get there as trade unions and Greens to unite on these issues? Yeah, thanks.
Another question in the room.
Thank you. Emily Iona Stewart from Open Societies Foundations. I suppose this question could go to any of the panelists that we've had today. It's about how we bring people along with the narrative, because I think policy making is the right level for this discussion to be at, but we talk a lot about how if we have more public access to policy making, that we'll get the kinds of results that we're hoping for to drive us in the right direction. However, I think that the chairman of Rio Tinto is probably right when he said that most people are looking for that American style lifestyle. And I think most people as well are not really looking for better public transport, but actually a lot of people still have a wish for a combustion engine car. So how do we bring people along with us on the narrative and make sure that when we do, hopefully in the future, have more public access to policy making, that the policy making made by the people is the policies that will bring us to a place that keep us within planetary boundaries and not just continue to perpetuate the systems that we have now. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, one last question then.
Hello, Ismael trading at the ETUC. I would like to do more as a comment, and then maybe you told me what you think. I think it's important to underline what also the speaker said about the policies regarding like the global south and global north. I think it's important we have like a sort of decolonial idea of ecology and ecological policies, in the meaning that it's important to remember when we talk about like public debates, when we talk about policies, or remember like the COP26 and everything, it's also everything about blaming like global south and blaming China, India. And of course we get that from their perspectives. They say like, but you have been using your capitalism for the last 200 years, polluting and doing your development. And now that you are developed, rich and everything, you are telling me that I can do the same. Why? Like, why is that? And I mean, also so I think it's hypocritical and wrong from that perspective. And also when you go and see, like, for example, the pollutants from China, for example, for like the trash, the garbage and stuff that comes from Western countries, like we pay them to burn our garbage. And I mean, that's still our stuff that we are, to avoid polluting, we are giving them our stuff to burn. And so they are polluting, they are developing with our trash, which makes you think. And also when you go and see like an American citizen, the average US citizen pollutes like 10 times the average Chinese citizen. So it's obvious that we are not all the same, and it's not the global south to blame when it's always like, but China and India want to continue polluting the air for the next 30 years, next 35 years. But we need to think at the opposite side. We need to think that it's us, that we rule the world. It's the West that controls the rest of the world. Just the other countries just want to, make along, just want to keep on surviving and developing as we have already done. Thank you.
Thank you. From my side, small question contribution. I would say on the question of power that was also mentioned, and what we allow, we don't allow, is I think also at the DNA of the problem. There's the question of, I have a quote from Rex Tillerson. I don't know if any of you know him, but former president of ExxonMobil, former state secretary of Donald Trump. He said, my philosophy is to make money. If I can drill and make money, then that's what I want to do. So that's the question, can we allow this? Then there's the second point. Of course, at the DNA of the problem, if Total last year shared 7 billion euros of dividend and made, I think, 14 billion euro of profit. And can this be without exploiting nature? And can this be without exploiting workers? So here it's the two dimensions that are interlinked. But then linking to the question on labor nature alliance, I think that behind the discussion on the transition, and I think it was said by Eloi, the cost of non-transition is important, so important that we have to go to the transition. There's no question about that. But behind there, it's how do we build the trust of people in the transition? They don't trust that the transition will not leave them behind. Any policies that is put in place now based on market mechanism, or even when we speak about energy efficiency that can lower the price of energy in their house. Yeah, but people that if you are not the owner of your house, what guarantee you have that this energy efficiency will not lead to price increase by your owner? So we have to build, it's just an example, but take all the climate policies, you can build the same type of arguments. How do we build the trust of people that the policies put in place will not leave them behind? And then to conclude from my side, I think I like also the comparison of the crisis we have with the Titanic, because the Titanic went into the iceberg. Okay, maybe there will not be any iceberg anymore in the future, this will not happen anymore. But the Titanic went into the iceberg because of the financial interest of the captain. And one of the main organization of the Titanic was the first, second, and third class in the Titanic. The third class could be the global south with no access to any decision, but workers in the global north, they are maybe in the second class in the Titanic. They have no access to the decisions in this regard on where the Titanic go. And both, we don't have a lifeboat. Only the first class has a lifeboat. And I think that behind this discussion is that we have to build the trust, but we have to build the protections for people to survive the crash that we can have in the next decades. So if all our guests wants to conclude, maybe with 2-3 minutes concluding remarks and answers to the question and comments, then we will conclude. If Philippe, you need to go, maybe if you want to start.
Yeah, but I can still think. It becomes maybe a bit. Okay, well, quickly, the Nature and Labor Alliance, yes, I'm all for it. I remember when I was elected 13 years ago, I came to some ETUI meetings where I said, well, you know, taxation is a crucial fight. And the answer was, well, yes, but not so important for us. For us, it's really labor conditions. And so get lost. And when I questioned growth, I had quite a lot of pushback and a lot has changed. So I would say that we are moving along well. Now, interestingly, what happened 2 weeks ago when we rejected the compromise on the ETS revision in the European Parliament, it is because for the first time ever in 13 years in the European Parliament, I saw the Social Democrats stiffening their backbone. Sometimes I felt they have no backbone any longer, but apparently they still have one, and they used it this time. So there's still many productivist people in the traditional left, but I hope that their influence is dwindling. But also, I mean, I'm glad to see that, for instance, when I look at Belgium's climate coalition, this is really the alliance. I see people coming from the environmental NGO on the one side and trade unions at the forefront, say social NGOs, converging to demonstrate together. So this is happening, maybe not fast enough. I'm a bit prudent when I hear, yeah, we should bring the people to our narrative, because this is still pretty much the model where, okay, there's an enlightened avant-garde of society that knows better than society what is good for society. What I see, for instance, is when Macron had his climate citizens conference, these citizens came with quite powerful proposals and bold proposals without being told to do this or that. I mean, they got the information and they proposed measures. So yes, I do believe that scientists have their role to play. Policymakers have a leadership, have to assume leadership and not just following society. But then again, I do believe that the transition will be, well, if it succeeds, will be the product of collective intelligence in society. It is not, okay, those enlightened ones will tell society what to do. I want, because this is pretty much the Macron attitude. I know, I will tell you, and if you don't agree with me, it's because you didn't understand. Let me explain again. And I don't want to be, well, and you know, with the Greens, there has been a tendency to act a bit like that. You are not doing well. Let us explain you climate and biodiversity, etc., and then you will understand that you need to change. No, it's about us, not about you need to change. It's us as a society that who need to invent a way out of where we are towards a pleasant society to live. And so, yes, in order to get there, we need much more participative decision processes. And this is where I do believe that you cannot separate, well, we said, okay, basically we cannot separate social and environmental, but I say you can't separate this from the democratic aspect. We will only be successful if we are able to reinvent our democratic processes. And there, of course, there's one aspect of participative democracy, which is the social dialogue between social interlocutors. But that's only one dimension of it, a very important one. And of course, it has been undercut for years. And just as a conclusion, how to build trust, because someone said, okay, we need to build trust in society that indeed the transition can be successful. I would say, yes, we are facing massive change. And in my view, the three conditions that need to be met for this to be successful is one, recognition that we need change. And this is progressing, maybe more in society than in the decision circles, but it is progressing. We are, well, you might say it's not fast enough, it's not big enough, it's not widespread enough, but I see massive progress. So the recognition that there's a need, a necessity is really there. Well, is there enough, I think. Second, the changes that are proposed must be seen to address the problem, because who would want to step out of his or her comfort zone for nothing? So, and there I remember discussions with the Gilets jaunes. Yes, okay, diesel is a problem, but look at the fuel of the aircraft or the fuel of the ships. This is much more polluting, and so we should rather go there, you know. And indeed, there's always a tendency to see the necessary changes on the plate of my neighbor, not on mine. But at least there must be some recognition that, yes, well, if we ban the internal combustion engine, yes, it goes some way to solve the problem. And so there we indeed need to make sure that we have the connection between the solutions and the problem. And the third condition for me for acceptance, and there's a part that is really about acceptance, is justice. I'm willing to make changes. If I know that my neighbor, who has 3 times my contributive capacity, is doing at least 3 times as much as I do. And again, back to what I said about the Gilets jaunes, when basically Macron lets the rich off the hook and then makes the life of rural French more miserable, then of course, it's not just that the justice criteria is not met, the injustice criteria is met. And so justice is crucial, absolutely crucial. If you have half the people not voting any longer, and if you have among the other half, 20, 30, 40% of the people who vote basically for fuck you parties, we have a massive problem of perceived, and rightfully so, injustice. So any solution that we bring forward must meet the necessity, the effectiveness, and the justice criterion. Otherwise, it won't work. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'll jump in very quickly. So responding to the first, I think the first couple of questions, I think one of the ways we build a labor and nature alliance, and one of the ways we change the narrative is to show practice. There are many, many different things we need to do, of course, so I'm going to speak just to this one. The importance of showing examples in practice, places where it's already happening, so that there is a positive aspiration of what we're looking for. As I said, I've just recently come back from the city of Barcelona. I went there on the train, by the way. It was a great train ride back from London to Barcelona and back. It's doable. But that's one way of reimagining mobility. The number of people who've been surprised when I say I went by train. Oh, can you really get to Barcelona by train? Yeah. And we need to show these things are possible. But reimagining mobility in a city, taking away this private car and replacing it with the bicycle, with the public transit, and replacing car-filled streets with playgrounds and places for people to meet and filling them with trees. I'm really was struck by what they are achieving in Barcelona, and the importance of that being visible is a possibility that other cities can say that's actually happening. It gives us peer-to-peer inspiration. It also gives us peer-to-peer permission to do these things. This is now practice. This is now happening. So I think the importance of practice for a positive narrative, for example, and for what it is that a Labour and Nature alliance are imagining and standing for together and seeing those realized together. And then I want to speak briefly to the person who spoke about the importance of recognizing we cannot critique the global south, critiquing India and China. I completely agree. And if we take a look at historical emissions, if we look at per capita emissions, the responsibility is very, very strongly with those in the global north. It does not fall to China because it happens to be a very large country. It's with the global north. What I find is shocking, and I want to repeat what Philippe was saying, the global north, even knowing it must move, it moves slowly, and it wants to take until 2050. And it's just shocking that we are dragging our feet, because of course this has huge implications for others. And I think as well as decarbonizing, the global north should be moving much, much faster in regulation to create a circular economy. The Netherlands has adopted regulation to say we will be 100% circular by 2050. Of course, no one actually knows what that means, but you figure it out by aiming to get there. They've also said in the Netherlands, they will be 50% circular by 2030. Now that's serious ambition for all half of materials in use in the country to be circular in use within a decade. That's serious ambition, and it should be the standard across Europe and across all high-income countries, because the more countries that commit to that, the more feasible it actually becomes, because circularity is only possible at an ecosystem scale of industries. So I think it's really important to recognize the global north-south role, and I stand with Philippe in saying, and Europe is being too slow and has to take on that responsibility much further.
Thank you, Kate. Eloi?
Okay, I will be really quick because we are running out of time. I think human transitions happen because of inequality, and they happen through institution. So my final message is we need to focus on acknowledging inequality. It's remarkable that the lobbies of the fossil fuel industries have managed to frame the conversation about inequality on the potential inequality of transition rather than the real inequality of non-transition. So we need to focus on the inequality that is happening today because of the current economic systems. And if there is a role for trade unions, is really to put inequality back at the center of the Green Deal. As you know, in December 2019, there was not even the word inequality in the original Green Deal text. And so we need to put back justice and inequality at the center of the Green Deal. So first, focus on inequality. Every human transition, and there have been many of them, have happened because of the fact that inequality was becoming unbearable, all right? And we need to focus on the actual inequality. And then the second part of the transition is building institution and showing that what I call social ecological transition is really much more stable than the current economic system. The current economic system is not, the problem is not it's unjust, it is irrational, and it is really short-termist. And building institution helps understanding that we can bring stability, stability in social life, stability in the biosphere. And so really focusing on inequality and institution, I think, is really the key to advancing the transition.
Well, one word,
Short,
sorry,
yeah.
because I mean, yes, I know. So I have to say that it is not only non-transition that puts questions about inequality. Transition itself raises genuine questions. And we have to take this seriously, and well, how to bring the people with. First of all, people have to believe that they are not losing on transition or on change, because currently we have to see that change is such a risk for everyday people, the labor market conditions like that, the precarious work and all what we have all around. Anything that changes puts you at risk, and that needs to be changed. So that would be one thing. And on regulation, I would say regulation needs to play. The market cannot fix everything. Regulation is important, but a good regulatory framework is necessary. I just would like to mention the car emissions regulation of 30 years, which was a complete disaster. It's bringing the whole car industry in the wrong direction, and SUVs, yeah, and plug-in hybrids, yeah, and for the rich and not for. So I mean, it's really difficult. Okay, thanks.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for all for this debate, to our contributors in the debate, for the questions, for our experts. We are running over time, so I will not conclude with further remarks, except saying that, yeah, building the trust in the transition will be key. And as the output of the debate is quite clear, the question is systemic change, and the participation of people in this transition. So thanks a lot. I think in 15 minutes there's the next session starting. So thanks for this debate, and see you soon.